Greetings, Earthlings, and welcome to the Obelisk. How's everybody doing tonight?
Fantastic. How are you two?
Wunderbar. Tonight, we have a very special guest, Randy Maugans from Off Planet Radio, come to talk to us about the Eye of the Needle. What the hell's going on in our matrix? It seems to be breaking down over the last month.
Absolutely. Breaking down.
It's crazy shit all around. So welcome, Randy, to the show. It's a pleasure to have you.
Hey, it's an honor to be on the Obelisk on the Worm Moon.
On the Worm Moon, that's right.
It's always a great pleasure to speak with you, Randy.
We are Sans astrologer tonight.
Yes, I had, and that's my fault. I apologize to Vanessa. I lined her up, and then everything got so crazy in this last 2 weeks. As everyone
Cunningham,
knows.
that's her last name. I just remembered it.
Yes, and so yeah, it's my fault, and I apologize. So she'll be on the next one. I'm sorry, Vanessa out there.
Randy, are you going to be in chat? I'm working on that right now. I'm trying to get this retarded MacBook to give me the link. You got it.
Yeah, you got it.
Kill a process. I'm now an app murderer. So get it. And that's perfect. I think we should all kill apps.
Especially on a Mac.
Can you hear me out there? I feel like I'm talking, and can you hear me, Jerry?
I can hear you just fine.
Yeah,
Randy?
Loud and clear. Loud
Okay,
and clear.
good.
5x5, baby. Let's see. I'll test the stream. Yeah.
Okay, so I was telling Jerry and Randy this before this. I get these I call them downloads. I think more New Ager people call it. I'm not sure what they call it, but
They call them downloads too.
Do they really? Anyway, so I usually get them at like 3 a.m, and I usually sleep. I mean, it comes in, and everyone that listens to me on air knows I'm pretty laser sharp with stuff, and follow threads and .connect and all that. But when these downloads to me are I hear myself.
Yeah, you did for a second. Sorry.
When these downloads happen, I get sidetracked. That's why I try to lay down and just allow them to happen. But for some reason, this is highly unusual. I'm having one right now, and so I'm getting sidetracked. So I apologize ahead if I sound disjointed or a little maybe crazy, because it's happening, and I have no control over them. They come when they come. So
You
just
said
a heads
come.
up, everyone.
You said come.
Oh Lord, let's not sink into a cruising with steak.
We won't. Don't worry about it. So, Randy, I heard your interview with Bernard. I forgot his last name again.
Gunther.
On whatever podcast it was. It was fantastic. I think were you on Freeman too?
I was on Freeman. That was actually Freeman's last show of the year, and that aired in late December, last week of December.
What was with his voice in that episode? It was so weird.
Yeah, I don't know. we'll just count it as being maybe a little under the weather at the time, energetically.
Oh, really?
He was, you know, this is something that's going on a lot. I think a lot of us are struggling. I mean, look what you went through,
Yeah.
you know, in November. And then I had about 3 weeks ago, had bronchial issues that put me in the hospital for 2 days. And I know Freeman's been struggling. I mean, there's a lot of things going on. And this is the thing about it. We put ourselves out there energetically. We're really subject to attacks in ways that I don't think people completely
Oh,
understand.
absolutely.
We're plugged into these networks neurally.
Yeah, that's something I've been talking about a lot in places. And it's also one of the reasons why I don't like to go live on cam as well. It's just like another way to psychically get a straw in you.
Yeah. I'm less and less enamored of doing cam. The shows Emily and I do, we tend to do video, but the Eye of the Needle series has so far been all audio. And that's just, most of that's recorded in one sit down session. I may or may not have notes. And I just kind of whip through the material that I've got, some of which is not dissimilar to what you're getting tonight, Soonish, which is the zip file that comes in. So to go back to Bernard Gunther interview, we did that. When did we do that? That was very early in the year.
Yeah.
Where we really just kind of delved into it. Every show that I do where I'm talking about the subject is different because it's a panoramic kind of visioning thing.
Sure.
That's really what the Eye of the Needle is.
And it's evolving.
It's evolving. It began with, the joke is, that's actually not a joke, it's true. It was a hashtag that I was using on some of my Twitter posts and Facebook as I was kind of assembling material dating back to 2012. I wasn't lost on me that as we went into 2019, we were 7 years out on the 2012 thing. And so following up on that, I began to get hits on looking at shows that I did in 2012 in that period. Because, you know, when we put dates on things, we forget that we live in a universe that's not really a clockwork the way we deal with time. I think Emily loves this line, Eye of the Needle 3, when I said nobody hates time and linearity more than me. And that's kind of true. I mean, it is not a linear reality. It's really stacked realities that occur in a nonlinear fashion. So the idea of Eye of the Needle is really to do what I call foreshadowing, or you might call it the prophetic voice. I don't, that's misunderstood when you use the word prophecy anymore, but the prophetic voice is really just the voice that speaks into situations, into visioning. That's really what it's all about. It goes back to this singularity, this Eye of the Needle thing. That's kind of the metaphor for where I saw us going, beginning the gateway into 2012, which was the winter solstice on 12/21, and then moving forward to what I see as probably a 5-year period.
I forgot what I was going to say now. No, that's real interesting, and it is, and it's been a long trip since 2012 too. It seems like things have changed so much, and then at the same time, nothing's changed. It's so weird.
The semblance of normality is amazing, but when you start to peel back the curtain, what you realize is a lot's changed.
Yeah.
And you kind of look at where we are, look where we've been since 2016. And this is controversial. You can put a pin in it if you want. But when I started to look at 2012 as the window, I began to look at what was going on in that window of time, and specifically what would have been going on in the middle of this period. Because for people who don't know, and most do, I did radio shows years ago that were based on prophecy, on biblical prophecy, specifically end times prophecy. And obviously evolved a long way out of that in my understanding about what maybe those mystical books are about, because I believe they're metaphorical. I don't think you can just throw them out, but you also, you know, the way it's been interpreted by fundamentalists especially, they've taken it literally, but there's something to what is shown in there. And one of them is these time periods of 7 years and 3.5 years, the half periods. So half of 7 years, 3.5 years. So I looked at, just out of curiosity, what the hell was going on in, let's see,
2015. Yeah.
Let's say about mid-year. And lo and behold, what came up was Donald Trump entering the race for the US presidency. And I went, that's pretty interesting. And so,
not to mention, a lot of people woke up in 2015, or claimed to have. Me especially. That was the year that, like, shit got real. For me, for sure. Sorry to interrupt you there.
No, that's actually really important, because I think a lot of people saw that as well. My own wife said that she realized she wasn't awake until sometime around that period, whatever that means to people. I don't think that's necessarily true. I've known you for a lot longer than that period, Jerry. And then, you know, it's all in degrees. Everybody's in a different place in terms of where they are in their awakening and their awareness. So that midterm period there represents a lot of things to a lot of people, not the least of which is the fact we entered another period of time that began this schism. And it was a fracture. It was like the thin line of a crack in a pane of glass. It's eventually going to rupture the whole thing. So I look at political leaders, entertainers, people of notoriety as sort of
transient.
They're fixtures. They're people who are in front of us that are reflecting back to us something about ourselves.
Well, that could be said of a lot of reality too.
Sure. Well, I mean, really, on one level, we're reflecting all of this reality back onto ourselves. That's another aspect of this. So,
and it seems lately too, there's a die-off of the older generation of those icons as well.
Yeah.
So there's like
more of that.
Yeah, exactly.
Stores are dropping like crazy, and
yeah,
old politicians are dying off, and
not Henry Kissinger.
Well, some say he died in 79 and was replaced with a clone.
I think some say that about everybody.
They do.
He's in Gitmo, and he's a clone.
So Randy, what are you having this background? And what's so funny is I, as everyone knows, I didn't have any religion forced at me, so I don't have a Christian backlash, how some people do. I have nothing to rebel against. So to me, the Bible, especially all the books that got cast out of the canon too, like the Gospel of Thomas, the fabulous Gospel of Thomas. Yep. I treat them like I do any other magical tome. And right now on my table is the big old 1885 or I don't know 65 whatever version of the Catholic Bible. What do they call it with the stricken books? The Apocrypha. It's like Apocrypha or something. Apocrypha, yeah, where it includes a lot of those books. But I have been going over it recently in the last few days, and then today I'm talking to my friend JJ, who like some Matthew verse came up, and one of her friends. I think a lot of people with all this stuff that's going on are looking at trying to connect what's going on with noted tomes, whatever the tomes are. But because I find the actual Bible interesting, because like I said, I have nothing bad to say about it. I've been astonished by some of the stuff I've been reading lately in it. Like absolutely mystical, magical, holds up to a lot of the tomes that all the magicians, talk about from the Middle Ages, and some of it's way more dramatic.
I got a synchro there.
Find.
I was just listening to a podcast about how the Bible is a grimoire.
Yes.
I was just going to use that word to describe it. It is a grimoire.
Double synchro.
Yeah. I love the synchro bell.
If you don't treat it as a singular book, which it's not, you begin to look at it on a different level. And the level is that this was written over a very long period of time, disputably 6,000 years, however you measure that. And it was written over several epochs that go back to probably the foundations of the earth itself. When you read the oldest book in the Bible is the book of Job, which describes the fallen angels. It describes this land of ice where these angels are vanquished to. Anyone thinking Antarctica? It's describing a very different world than the world that would come later, because actually Enoch himself was taken up. He didn't die. It said he was basically transfigured into a non-corporeal being, a light being, much like
Christ.
much like the prophet Elijah, and much like the Jesus figure later on. And that ended that era, that epoch, and the next epoch that came was the epoch of the flood, the Great Flood. So the book's written over these epochs, and it reflects different mindsets at different times. There are multiple gods in it. Reading the Old Testament, if you read it with the word God and don't understand how many different ways that's translated, especially when you go back and look at the Hebrew in it, you would consider that it's monotheistic, but it's in fact polytheistic. So we're not dealing even with, like, in some cases, the same gods. I mean, these people are going through different stages of spiritual transformation as well, to the place where they get to form of monotheism, which is basically the Mosaic era.
See, this is all the stuff that, I just can't, I'm not a deep diver in it. And that's why I'm all of a sudden super interested in these books, and in the process of, in its overall process and arc of where it's been, how it transformed, what are the different messages that are weaving in and out of it, and how does that play into the greater picture of all the other tomes, all the other grimoires, and then overlap that on top of where we are now with all the craziness. It's very intriguing.
Yeah, I mean, it's a in a lot of ways, it's reflecting back to us periods that we've passed through before in the procession of the ages. And that's kind of where the eye of the needle came from. In one sense, it was using where we've been in the microcosm of the last, you could arguably say the last 50 years, because we've been in a very high level evolution period since the end of the Second World War, which was a demarcation line. And so the generations that started to come in post-World War II, the baby boom generation specifically, came in with something different. We were kind of the harbinger of the age of Aquarius, before the age of Aquarius really began. If you go back and you look at the 60s and you even look at the music, like the Broadway musical Hair, which was celebrating the age of Aquarius, and the hippie movement, and then the New Age movement, as much as I hate that term, sort of became the bellwether for this new spiritual awakening. You had a lot of Eastern thought that migrated into Western culture. People began to talk more about their inner lives. They began to talk more about reincarnation. We were sort of transitioning away from this westernized monotheism that was brought to us by
the Spaniards.
Church of Rome. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. I would even argue that wouldn't argue. I think it started in 1947. That's kind of the year everything took off from there.
Totally. The Second World War was, it was the framework from which everything else sprung, including on what you would call the dark side, their hopes for the New World Order. The old order being, and we just had Michael Joseph on with Emily and I last week talking about the first 1,000 years of Christianity and how that was really the old world order was the movement that came out of Rome and then the Vatican Catholicism, the Protestant movement, which migrated into Europe, and then the colonial movements that came out of that, and the Industrial Revolution. So the bookmark was the implosion of Europe in World War II, the dramatic culmination of the industrial age and the transition into the technological era, which Brzezinski talks about in his book.
Yeah, that's a pretty interesting book too. There's some prophetic stuff in there.
Yes, of course there is. See, when people talk about prophetic, they don't understand that actually is an act of summoning. It's what I was talking about with the eye of the needle, which I view as the prophetic voice, but I see as foreshadowing, which is a way to weave into the consciousness of the time the vibratory energies necessary to move us into the next period. So from my standpoint, I get downloads much like Nisha's getting and like you get, Jerry. I call them zip packets. And the eye of the needle comes from that place where I began probing, kind of remote viewing what was going to happen out maybe 5 years in the future, what it was going to look like. And I got it. This came over a period of time, I would say beginning last summer. I was basically going through a pretty deep, sometimes dark personal period and trying to do both some internal healing and also reconciling different things, and began working more with my my energies. As a result of that, reactivated a lot of dream capacity that I hadn't had for a while, and also began to work more in my subtle body, and started going out at night. Several times went up into these grids around the earth and began to see what those were all about. That was really interesting. I also took, here's the woo-woo, folks. I also took out a couple of implants in my energy body and wound up walking around for about 2 weeks seeing ghosts, omens, specters, all kinds of shadow beings all over the place. That eventually calmed down as well. But I went through this period of just really intense spiritual upheaval where I began to get a sense that the future wasn't defined. It was something we were going to fashion in our own vision, we collectively and we individually, and began to understand a little bit more about how the reality construct works inside of the matrix. And that was kind of the whole thing with these grids, was understanding that these grids are really an interlaced system that are reflecting and moving and amplifying, much like a circuit board, all of the creative powers of the collective on this world. and that we had an enormous amount of power, and that most people were in default mode.
Right.
90% of the people on this planet are in default mode. They are walking through visions of a life that was handed to them. They are robotic. They don't really want to do the work inside. And so, and this is really how the control system has worked. It's largely been that these so-called, whatever you want to call them, the Cabal, the Illuminati, it doesn't really matter.
Just how about the narrative? The global narrative drives
They just basically were able to figure out, look, these people are asleep. We can navigate this ship by ourselves. Forget that we're like maybe 1/10 of 1% of the total population, if even that. Everybody else is in default mode. We're now the Grand Masters. And the idea of avatars and messiahs and people who came as teachers, whoever you consider, Krishna, Buddha, the Christ, whatever, they were the other side of that equation, which was trying to go, now you can make a difference. You can vision this for yourself. They were not trying to build religions. They were trying to teach people how to become, the buzzword would be sovereign. The buzzword, you know, it's kind of a tainted word, but for all intents and purposes, to become masters of our own reality, which we've defaulted as a result of a whole host of things that have gone on in life here and now and in life previous, and how people have basically not only been brainwashed and wiped in this world, but between lives as well.
Sure.
So the vision was to awaken whatever percentage, 3%, 5% of the population, which I think is doable, which then can re-navigate this thing back to a more reasonable mode, away from the necropathy that has run the planet for eons.
When you were telling all this, I'm getting this imagery of the second Blade Runner movie, where, you know, it's the girl downloading, creating the memories and implanting, you know, everyone's memories are from a real source, a real seed source, but are not there. So like the main character that thinks he is, that thinks he was real, and you know, he in the end realizes,
like Neo.
Like Neo, yeah, but where you think you're actually the dreamer and you're not the dreamer. And when this moment of realization where it's, but yet you're still, this sounds, it sounds contradictory, but it's, not in my head, it doesn't. Where you realize you're not the dreamer, but at the same time, you're dreaming the dream too. Does that make sense?
You're like bilocated.
It's the dreamer dreaming the dream inside the dream.
Yes.
It's a conundrum.
It's a conundrum.
It's a paradox.
It's a paradox. But at the same time, it creates that friction, which does create that inner spark. And it's the inner spark that is that awakening feeling, where you become lucid to your own experience, to the I am within. And so, and then I had a question about, because I did know about your history with, I knew about your religious stuff in the past, I think from Nox Mente, and then just listening to you. But as I've been looking around that tome that we're calling the Bible, I encountered the other day that I hadn't really encountered earlier, several times, at 144. Now I know everyone knows that. Yeah. It's made the mainstream as far as New Age and truther community, all that. It's all over, but I hadn't encountered it in scripture. Like, I knew it came from there, I just didn't see, you know, I encountered it in Revelations. I don't know if it's elsewhere in the Bible. I was specifically seeing it in Revelations. uh,
Yeah, it is nowhere else in the Bible, that specific number.
so that's the only spot it lives.
Yeah, there's two places, Revelation chapters 7 and 14 are really the only two citations that specifically mention the 144,000.
Yeah. And yet that has been a very potent meme in the collective. A lot of people refer back to 144,000 or whatever souls. And I'm wondering, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, my thoughts on it are like, where to even begin with that? So the 144,000, as it was interpreted in the New Testament, the book of Revelation, originally was part of an entire series that I did. Like, I'm talking maybe 300 shows over 6 years that I did with, I always have seemed to have female co-hosts. And I was working with a woman named Sue Patterson who wrote a book. And the title of the book was The 144,000 in the Multitude. And it was a prophetic examination of basically the world right up to the end of the world as we saw that. And so the 144,000, first off, if you read it and you read the roll call that occurs in Revelation chapter 14, and if I get some of these chapters wrong, it's just because I'm rusty.
Come and see.
But remember that 144 is 12 squared.
Yes.
And the
with
number
12
plays
tribes.
out hugely with the 12 tribes, which are actually 13 tribes. But there's actually inside of the Old Testament several times where the tribes are enumerated. First off, the original enumeration that was made to Moses, then it occurs again in the book of Ezekiel, at Ezekiel's temple. And each time the tribes are roll called, they're different. Some have dropped off, some have become apostate. Eventually, the 12 kingdoms fall. They rebuild this temple. It's a really pretty second-rate temple. There's actually 3 temples historically. And then it transitions after the book of Malachi, which is not in linear order either, but it doesn't matter because it worked in terms of a narrative, into the New Testament and the book of Matthew, which then begins the era of Jesus. And then there's the 12 disciples. And again, there's actually 13 because one of them is Judas, who obviously hangs himself and then is replaced ultimately by the Apostle Paul. So it's interesting to see the foreshadowing that goes on there, because you're actually seeing the foreshadowing of the 12 tribes, the 13 tribes with the 13 disciples, apostles. So it plays into an overlay, a template, in terms of some numbers that prophesy towards the order of a very small group of people who represent what I will say are the seed of humanity, however you interpret that. If we wanted to be literal about it in terms of one narrative that I did a lot of commentary on, which was the NPCs, the non-player characters in video games, you could say that the multitudes that are shown in the Bible are all background characters, NPCs, non-human, or RPGs or live action role players, but the real deal is the 144,000, and that's the core of humanity. I think the number's emblematic. I think it's a symbolic number.
Isn't the Enochian chessboard, isn't that a 12 by 13 grid too?
Yes, of course.
Yeah.
Because Enochian magic plays right into this. It's that's the mystical side of this. That's why you had books that were excised from the scripture. That's why you have apocryphal texts and Gnostic texts and scrolls that show up in 1947. Like,
the year of fuckery.
Wait a minute. So what the fuck is going on here? It's like some shit just doesn't want to be disappeared, does it? It's like the sands of time blow open, and there's the golden tablet, and you're going, oh, this certainly makes things a lot more interesting.
Or
Yeah.
they're inserted into the reality as hints, like like
or they're like I've
treasure.
said about it's like I've said about even these Tartarian structures. What if these structures are being revealed now because we put them there for ourselves in the future to remind ourselves as bookmarks? And it's like we
Yes.
woke up and we
Seeding.
looked at these things and we went, holy shit, look at that.
We need to get Flavor Town in here if we're going to talk Tartaria.
See, it's seeding, and I think, like, when I look back at the conversations I had with my mama when I was little, and they didn't, our relationship was very much in the car while she was telling parables, essentially, and she seeded all these conversations. They were all adult, we're little kids, my brother and I, and some of them are coming to bloom now, where I didn't understand what was she talking about, and then, like, 4 days ago I had this epiphany. I'm like, oh my God, this is what she meant, to my 4-year-old self. And she told them in allegory, and basically in sing song. So it was symbols that would awaken in me when I needed them, essentially, and break through cover stories. I think I told you that privately too, Randy. And so this is how I'm reading a lot of and I'm, as you said earlier, the grimoires, which I include the Bible and the books of the Bible as, and so, but I find it interesting that the 144 is just unavoidable. It's everywhere. It's in all. It seems to find its way in all the deep woo wells.
Yeah, some of us suspect that it's also perhaps genetic code. I was trying to read the chat, and I see some people there catching on this, talking about this being code. Yeah, it's all code. I mean, a lot of this is encoded into the gematria as well. And there's some people doing incredible work with gematria. I'm not as facile with that as I am with what I'll say are probably more metaphorical aspects in interpretive schools. I'm still trying to learn to do tarot. I read tarot every once in a while, but I do it for myself. That's an act of visioning too. But these mystical numbers play hugely into it, including the Enochian magic and the dark arts as well, because the only thing the dark arts are is the obverse side of the construct. I mean, we're on the obelisk tonight. What is the obelisk? It's a needle. It's Cleopatra's needle.
Yep.
It's a phallus pointing towards heaven.
Yes.
It's the creative and procreative on an interface.
Yes.
Wasn't it originally, was it Osiris's dick, right? The phallus.
Yeah, theoretically.
Yes.
Yeah.
Allegedly. I mean, I don't believe anything the historians say about Egypt because I don't know jack.
Well, it ties in also to the, from into other mythology with the Venusian stuff, which ties into the Luciferian stuff. It's woven in and out of all these different mythos. And so it's fascinating how that's where I come from, is how is this stuff kind of interlaced and woven together to create this bigger tapestry. And that's why I find it so rich to consult all of these tomes and see where they can take you as a whole, as opposed to their separate components.
Yeah, it is a tapestry. That was kind of, drawing it back to the eye of the needle again, that was part of the imagery of the needle itself, was how you have this single eye on this very long pointed object that you thread through. Then the thread itself via the needle is inserted into the matrix, into the fabric. And the eye is the single eye, it's the one eye, it's visioning. You're constricting one piece of fabric using a metal, or, well, I guess bone was probably was used in the earliest needles, to then interface that into this tapestry. So in one sense, that was another side of the metaphor behind the eye of the needle, was that it was basically a means to enter into the fabric of the construct and begin to change the construct, while at the same time visioning it and working within our own energetics and our envisioning.
On another level, too, it also acts as a filter.
Mm-hmm. It's a constriction. You
Yeah.
have to constrict the thread to get it through the eye.
Right.
That's where we are right now. We're in, and I think Bernard Pinter mentioned this in the write-up that he did for it, that we're in this period of constriction, this period when everything is just being stressed. And if you look around
Yeah.
the world right now, in 2020, it was like we shot right into it. Boom. I mean, there was no after party cleanup at all. We just went straight into it.
It's the nightmare that never came in 2000.
Now, see, their timing was off because they thought the millennium began in 2000. It began in 2001, and they celebrated it by taking down their twin towers.
Mm-hmm. And putting up a new third tower.
Right. Well, and then the Vedic stuff has been saying, which has been on my radar, that this was, Vedic astrology is really great for as far as predictive astrology, and this was always on the table for being a very eventful period with the alignments going on right now that harken back to to a big event like 9/11, and that we can keep going. Each little cycle back had something very significant, and here we are. But there's also the fuckery of the Gregorian takeover of the calendar, from the lunar calendar and the 28-day 13 months of 28-day cycles to the calendar that got taken over, and where we are now, and in a leap year to make the difference up. So it's always this weirdness of something that's conceptual, which is time. This constant twisting of the idea of time, and how easy it appears to be, looking back historically, it can get co-opted. Like the Gregorian calendar is a great example of that, in my opinion. That you can just sidetrack the whole reality.
And hindsight is 2020.
Exactly.
Har.
The trick is to have hindsight and foresight.
Yes. Well, and that's what you do. You strip out the time factor.
Yep.
You go to the 0 point with it. And so, and I mean, that's where I get into my deep woo, with that whole, on a personal level, with the 0 point consciousness as opposed to 0 point physics. And of course, I postulate that it's the same anyway. And then you start talking droids and all that.
You talk 0 point consciousness, and it's I call it the horizon. It's exactly the place where there's equidistance between forward and backward, the event horizon. And that's what I think these solar events represent to a large degree, if not in fact in metaphor. I don't know why, but I seem to get real high energetic hits on the solar cycles big time, solstice and equinox. And the solstice in 2019 was huge. And I've got information that I'm going to be putting out with the next Eye of the Needle podcast that talks about what really went on, even in terms of what we call space and space energies and space weather, and the energetics that were literally bombarding the earth for a number of days, and how we're going through time shifts as a result of cosmic forces coming in. I don't view space the way the normal models are predicated. I don't deny that there are bodies up there and that there is something around us, but what it is exactly and how you get there is another issue completely. And Emily and I have talked about this for years, about the fact that we think that first off, space is actually an internal space and that you enter it through water. But we have these energies around us that are cosmic forces that seem to project energies into the earth to which we are connected. So it's almost like again, like a circuit board. It's like the circuit board lights up and the logic gates shift and a whole new process starts rolling. So if you look at it like a computer, basically, you reboot the computer, you start a new operating system and a new cycle.
I just saw a notice the NBA has suspended the rest of the season.
Are they really?
Can you believe that?
Yeah.
Because apparently one of the players on the Utah Jazz tested positive for the crown.
For the coronavirus. What is this really? I mean, we don't really have any proof about anything connected to coronavirus right now.
I know. Tom Hanks and Rita Wilson. Wait, I just saw Tom Hanks and Rita Wilson tested positive for it.
This to me, in the download I received when I made the tithing of Melchizedek, which was ahead of this whole thing with the locusts and the viruses that include the mystery virus in Brazil and in Africa, is a bloodline war. Sorry.
It's confirmation. The dogs.
Or like the beasts want to be heard saying this too.
To quote Castaneda. Confirmation.
It's a bloodline war, and where I follow that up with House of the Holy Blood. Also, there's more to it than that, but there's a lot going on with exposure of DNA strands. There's a lot going on with what I call the event horizon, which was when we hit the singularity, which I believe we already hit, and we're dealing with the time shift back.
Yep.
And you know, Jerry and I really got into that in the Conspiranormal podcast we talked about. And so that's all tying into this, and it's playing out in very interesting ways. So it's interesting observing it and being in the water with it, so to speak, this whole process of what is becoming the virus of the day.
I mean, they're calling this pretty close to a pandemic.
They declared it a world pandemic.
There just aren't enough. There's not
enough data.
Confirmation. Yeah. There's not enough data. Even people in the positions of authority don't seem to be in agreement about this. It almost looks like a football being kicked back and forth. If you looked at the Twitter posts that Trump's put out and some that have been put out by some people who work in the medical field, and a lot of the stories behind what's going on with these connections with Wuhan and is it Harvard University. And then there's the bioengineering projects going on where the CDC owns all these patents, and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation connected to the Mayo Clinic. And there's a lot of hands in this that have no interest at all in telling you the truth about anything, but have a real big vested interest in creating a climate of panic. I mean, my wife came home tonight and told me that the stores are out of toilet paper. I thought this was a joke.
The toilet paper thing is I don't even know where to start with it. I can't believe, it's like all things.
Paul Watson put out
most people they don't have to worry about shitting because they're not going to have enough food to worry about.
Right, exactly.
Seriously, of all things,
I
toilet
mean,
paper.
Paul Watson today put out a video and he was talking about specifically the toilet paper thing, and he mentioned that when people go into panic mode, they buy big things to make them feel better. It somehow eases their fear of mortality.
Quilted Charmin does that for me.
I like the lavender angel soft myself, but
I'm more of a rough trade girl.
I just like some gription in my
Cheap and
TP.
rough. Just kidding.
Well,
it is. It's that. I mean, you can't make that stuff. The American population with the toilet paper run is. It's a meme. It's unbelievable to me that is the level in which, with the idea of a threat, that's what people would be having a run on with, not other things that might be more conducive to the narrative that's playing out, but toilet paper.
And here's a good question. Do you think that this virus, however it started, is an attempt to disrupt something that was in play? Or not in play, but just that was moving forward? Like, I don't know what I'm trying to say here. Is it a diversionary tactic? Or is it something natural that's occurred? What do you think about that?
it is, I think I described it the other day in a tweet as a multifaceted cover up. If you look at the financial system, and we've been sitting on this ticking time bomb for years, the bond market specifically had incredible weaknesses. The Fed, which has basically just been dumping money into the system with no support at all. Obviously, this is backed by bonds. I mean, I don't know that people realize that the bonds are the mechanism by which the, on paper anyway, hike this fiat currency. So the buyers of the bonds, the bond market itself has been so soft. And what people forget in the narrative is that the bonds were really how we were paying for goods from our Pacific Rim partners, specifically China. That China holds a lot of this paper. And when Trump put into effect the trade tariffs, what he did, well, probably one of the most constitutional moves done by an American president in half a century, and really the only way the Constitution ever allowed for the country to have any type of, I guess you would say, money accrued from a taxing mechanism was tariffs, specifically on foreign trade. What he was effectively tariffing was the return on investment that was no longer going to happen on these bonds that had become nearly worthless paper that China held in great abundance. And now even the cash flow back and forth between the banks was going to be taxed at this level. So, while on the surface it looks like they're playing a fair game, they're really not. We've basically left our foreign trade partners holding bad paper in exchange for all these cheap goods that we've imported for the last 35 to 40 years.
Just have another news flash. Apparently Trump is suspending all travel to Europe or from Europe.
This comes into something interesting because I think I put a lot of stuff out on Twitter, and a lot of it's just stuff that comes off of the top of my head. But it's not lost on me that this could be a move towards isolationism, where we just basically, the horrible reality of it is that America outsourced itself over a period from 1974 up through the early 2000s heavily. I mean, from the time Nixon went to China and negotiated the first trade contracts with the Red Chinese, we have seen a steady movement of our plants, our infrastructure, our shipping, our logistics sent offshore. And basically, we've been sitting here with boats and container cars coming in, dumping goods on American shore, while America is not really, we really haven't paid our bills. We're not a good trade partner, and we're forcing them to use our dollar under Bretton Woods, which means is that we have more ways of screwing them than they have orifices to protect at this point. Now, that's kind of crude, but I don't know how else to put it. It's a pretty crude operation. You need boatloads of Vaseline for this stuff.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I was asking in a roundabout way was, is this a stab at globalism? Because...
Yeah, globalism. Yeah, I do see this, and this is part of the whole visioning thing, is that what I've been seeing is the world's going to look very different by 2024, 2025.
2021.
I think you're going to have an isolated America. I think America.
Well, yeah, 2021 was, of course, supposed to be the, that's the checkpoint, and then 2030, everything's supposed to be in the bag, wrapped.
Yeah, but that's not such a bad thing. I mean,
isolationism?
Yeah, if we can bring our manufacturing back to the States, I mean, this is definitely going to wake up people to start manufacturing businesses, especially if the credit market loosens up, which it undoubtedly will, especially with the Fed lowering rates, and I'm sure they're going to lower them again. If not going negative.
There's not much further to go at this point. It's
True.
Like you dropped your underwear, but it's still over your ankle. You're going, well, I still have another half-inch to go. No, you're already naked.
We can see your sack.
Right now.
Yeah.
Your butt is already hanging out there, Cowboys. Sorry.
That's right.
We don't have that far to go. And quite truthfully, and I did put this out on Twitter, the fact that we allowed globalists to take the industrial genius of America and outsource it. And it began right after the First World War. So we were never players in the world of solid state electronics in America. Like, we made tubes. We were great right up until the 1950s. But when the transistor came in, when solid state electronics began to be manufactured, there were really no semiconductor plants. There were a few small ones. The majority of solid state electronics were not only, they were mostly designed here originally, but most of them were manufactured in Japan originally. Japan, later Korea, later on. We were never players in the technology that we had basically engineered coming out of World War II.
I thought the aliens brought them from Roswell, right?
Roswell, I was Jerry and I were just like, I'm going to go right in there. Here we go, the aliens. Yep, got it.
Yeah, well, you look at like, what is it, Fairchild, Bell Labs, and TI are basically the semiconductor creators or manufacturers that survived, or that strived rather, and then it all went overseas. You're right.
Yeah, no, well, that was the deal. The deal was that Japan as a conquered nation would then become part of the New World Order. I mean, you have corporations like Sony, which is a Rockefeller corporation. It's Standard Oil New York, but they took the letters and they made it Sony and told you it was some weird Japanese word that doesn't exist, and then sold you a shit ton of electronics with it on it, of which I plead totally guilty. I bought all kinds of Sony stuff, but we never manufactured it. And when we got to the computer era, other than the homebrew clubs, we really never manufactured computers either. That was all foreign trade. The computer revolution.
Yeah, even the ones we did make, the parts were all outsourced from overseas.
Yeah, the components definitely were. Logic boards
and still are.
Yeah, still are.
I think Intel actually makes their own chips right now.
I think there is a fab. And Apple actually does have a plan. I don't know what it's producing. But
mind control devices?
Probably. Well, there's the good news. The good news is that the secret space program's been manufacturing shit in space for the last 60 years.
No, we don't want to talk about the ICC right now. So yeah, you're not a big believer in the secret space program and the whole, what is it, the Catherine Austin Fitts narrative?
Well, there's a narrative there. The question is, what is it? And when you look,
this ties into your whole view of what space is, which I also have an alternative view of space. So
yeah, it ties into what space is. This actually on YouTube, on off our YouTube channel is youtube.com/offplanetmedia. There's a show up there, episode 3, Eye of the Needle, where I go into interdimensional aspects of trade, human trafficking, the fact that it's in all likelihood they are using off-world resources, off-world environments to do advanced manufacturing, that the trade that is being negotiated there is a very different type, that Earth is just basically a colony to provide the human intellect, the human vibratory aspects, and the soul for a process to trade goods and services between worlds, or even dimensionally. And yeah, so I mean, there is no secret space program. They don't call it that. It's to say that it's one construct is to not understand how sophisticated our world is. That, if you look at Lockheed Martin or any of these other aerospace or defense contracting corporations, of which there are thousands of various scale, there's a huge industry there that's not accounted for in terms of our normal economic indexes. And there's, what was it? I saw the military budget where, Jesus, they lost more money than they ever had. And you're going, how does that even work? They literally hundreds of trillions of dollars disappeared into vapor, and yet you looked at their budgets and you went, you didn't have that much allocations in the last decade to lose. And it's like Rumsfeld the day before 9/11 making the announcement,
2.3,
and then the next morning they blow up the buildings, and you're kind of like, you guys don't really have a good accounting system, do you? Or do they? Here's the interesting thing about
that's what I postulate.
So what
I think where you're going, yeah.
And this is my postulate is what Catherine Austin Fitts actually saw was one side of the ledgers. She saw ledgers, she saw books, she saw expenditures. What she didn't see was the profit side of the ledgers, which are the incoming profits from all the activities of what you would call the secret space program. But the black budget is far much more than a black budget. It's complete. Now, they use the term breakaway civilization. They haven't really broken away. They're actually more of a parallel civilization that operates on another level. I mean,
it's kind of parasitic, though.
See,
it's very parasitic.
Yeah,
I tend to think that the secret space, quote, the air quote secret space, is underground. Or
some of it is.
Even Antarctica. It's not in public view, but I don't think it's in space.
Space is a...
Yeah.
So there's the interdimension aspect to this.
Oh, wait. I just want to say one more thing, too. Sorry. Yeah. I do want to hear what you're going to say. The double budget thing, the double financial system, is something that Joseph P. Farrell talks about.
Sure.
That there's a second financial system, and it's kind of revealing itself in these aspects. So, sorry, yeah. So space.
Well, you've heard of the comprehensive annual financial reports as well.
Sure.
Right.
Sure.
And that's the double bookkeeping system that every government, from your local municipality right up to the Federal Reserve run, which is basically reserve funds held in secret accounts that function as slush money, off budget. Completely legal, by the way. How that works, I don't know. You do that shit, you'll be 30 years in some federal prison somewhere. So, space and what goes on under the ground that's complex. There's a book out there. I don't have it in front of me right now. If you've heard of Peter Moon Peter Moon's
Yep.
published a number of books, series based on the Transylvania series.
The Radu
Radu
Cinnabar.
Cinnabar.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Transylvania Sunrise was the first book, and there's like 5 books in the series, and the newest one is The Second Tunnel Under the Earth. That book goes into some very interesting concepts that will challenge, and anybody that reads this book can go back and look at what we've been saying on our show for years. This will challenge every premise you have about space, gravitation, the Earth itself and how the Earth is constructed. That book goes into the fact that there is, in fact, another system inside of the Earth, another sun, which is actually another vortex, another dimensional portal. And once you begin to understand that you have a world within world structure, which was kind of what I was alluding to in EOTN 3, it doesn't matter whether it's up or down, because in space there is no up or down anyway.
Right. It's just next or previous.
And the gateways into these things, we've just known this. It's like we've known it's water. I mean, there's just everything about our reality says that water is a portal. It's a gateway, that there's something going on there. And then there's inner space, which is, we are microcosms of the universe ourselves. Everything that exists in what you would call the universe exists inside of us. I mean, look at our bodies. We're a vortex. We have seawater, the same components of seawater in our blood going through our body, and magnetic forces. You know, if there's 2 forces that have been completely relegated into the outbacks of knowledge, it's water and magnetism. And yet they're the 2 greatest forces that we have when we begin to understand them. And so the construct of space is both an inner world, outer world portal. It connects to inner Earth because we're attached to Earth. We are part of Earth. This Earth is part of us. It's inseparable. And the 2 books that really confirm this is, again, the Radu Cinnabar book, The Second Tunnel, and then a book that you can probably download offline called Ida Dorpa, which was published back at the beginning of the 20th century. And Ida Dorpa is the story of a man who, under the tutelage of a Masonic cult, frankly, is shepherded into inner Earth, where he then gets a bird's eye view, so to speak, of what really goes on inside of a world where you walk underneath the oceans themselves, where there are dimensional worlds within dimensional worlds. It's almost like a honeycomb. It's like time doesn't exist the way we understand it inside the Earth, something that a number of us have understood as kids, that time is very flexible. This is what you were talking about at the beginning of the show, Nish. This very plasticity of time. Gravity doesn't function the same way. In Ida Dorpa, the main character is transformed at one point. He's taken into a Masonic lodge. He's a man of probably about 30 years old. They age him to the age of about 70. They turn him into an old man. And you'll find out later in the book that they did this because he goes into inner Earth. He actually starts to reverse age again. So if you read that book and you read the Second Tunnel book by Radu Cinnabar, your concepts about almost all of mainstream science are going to be challenged. And this is exactly the journey that I undertook when I started my show 10 years ago. It's a lot of the reason why Emily and I kind of have had the conversations we do is because she sort of intuitively understood this as well, that these concepts are so far out. They fly in the face of everything you've ever been taught, and yet there is a substance to them. And even here, there's an unveiling occurring. The Radu Cinnabar book only came out, I think, in 2019. So, some of the things that I've been talking about, that other people have been talking about in terms of gravity, in terms of time, in terms of what goes on inside of the earth, uh, all of this stuff is now being unveiled in pretty amazing ways.
Yeah, we had Peter Moon on our show not too long ago, and he was actually talking about how he had I forget how many, 4 or 5 books of Radus that he was waiting to get copies of to translate. So I mean, there's more information
There's
there.
more material.
Yeah, that
That was alluded to as well by Moon in the epilogue for the Under the Tunnel book.
yeah.
That I mean, they have to release this stuff under the title of fiction. And
Of
that's
course, as always.
Dorpa too. But you see, all of your great truths are veiled in either as fiction or
art.
as in metaphor. What we were talking about in terms of the shadow language, the prophetic voice, all of it is woven into the fabric of this reality. And this goes back again to the people who are in default mode for so long, who have allowed somebody else to do their thinking and their knowing for them, is that when you're in default mode, you will accept the narrative that's been given to you. And for whatever reason, there are those among us who didn't come into this world accepting much of anything. I was one of them. Totally.
Hello, me
like,
too.
just
Me
called
three.
bullshit all the time.
Rebel Gene.
It's a hard life.
It ain't easy, baby.
It's a hard
Or
knock.
get you locked up. I mean,
Yeah.
It's a hard knock life.
The Annie program.
Sorry, I'm reading Twitter.
You guys, I swear. So with all this that we're talking about with timelines and all that, and I appreciate you saying time slips. That I that's where I go with it instead of the whole Mandela thing. But maybe it's a shout out to Starfire. I don't know. How so with this collective, with the collective meme, and I'm going to use that word, going on right now, tied into all these different ideas of prophecy and resets, endings and beginning, tens, right? The one is 0 and all that. How do you, from your view, Randy, how do you see us, how do we ride this out gracefully?
Yeah. I don't know about gracefully. Certainly not going to be comfortable.
Well, it's not going to be comfortable, and we can't take away the fact that it's very, whatever real feels like, it feels that way too. So we're in the sensate of it. We're experiencing it. We're having an experiential lucidity around all of it. And there's certainly the apparent idea of time with it because there's a causality effect.
Grow comfortable with paradox. It's becoming stronger all the time. There are, the way that we've determined reality has largely been based on a very fixed construct of what is, quote, normal, of what is perceptually accepted. And I'm seeing it in the mainstream, in people, IRL, real life, where even what I call mainstream people, their narrative is breaking down. Like, in some ways, it's been gentle. It's like taken very long time to do, but if you watch the evolution from standing back and watching human beings, the reality is constantly being changed anyway. Before 2001, who would have guessed we would have a Department of Homeland Security and that we couldn't get on planes until we were body scanned, anally probed, had our luggage torn apart, and 4 guards go through our pockets. But that reality came very quickly. We're now bumping up on this next thing, which is whatever coronavirus really is they're attempting to install yet another layer of control. But the reason why they're doing it, the reason why they did a 9/11, which was obviously a prophesied event, even the Bible talks about when the towers fall, in the book of Revelation. And that wasn't lost on me when I saw 9/11 happen. So now we're in the era of the plague. We'll call it the plague. We'll call it that because that's what they're calling it. And it is a means to install another level of control because of the rising of the 144,000. If you stay with the Bible and you just stay with the metaphors, what you see is that all of this shit is going on in the world. There's plagues, there's floods, there's earthquakes in diverse places. There's sun turns to darkness, the moon turns to blood. Gosh, where have we seen that? How many blood moons have we had in the last 3 years? Didn't we have
A
an
lot.
eclipse?
I know.
It was in
Let's talk
20.
about that freaking eclipse, man. That thing was
That was definitely another reality changing event or
That was
a
demarcation.
checkpoint.
Yeah.
that was
Yeah.
a time shift.
There are
That
3
was to do-
supermoons this year.
Yes, and we have another American eclipse that will occur in 2024 as well. So they may be bookmarks. They may be the dual portals of this period that we're in now, which is this window, this constriction, this eye of the needle thing. And the way we get through this is we become flexible enough in our thinking, our reality, and even our physicality. This is important, that we can go through this. A virus is not going to kill you. You will die when you are supposed to die. And if you decide otherwise, if you decide that coronavirus is real, that it's invaded your body, then it'll take you out. But I'm telling you that energetically, the reason why a disease will take you out is because you have a proclivity for death. I mean, Jerry survived what is probably one of the most bizarre things I've ever seen a person go through. I mean, and everybody's going, nah, this isn't Jerry's time. Jerry will make it. You know, like people were praying and meditating and speaking words and going, and I'm like, I knew when we were watching this whole thing that Jerry was going to make it. And I got sick as hell a few weeks ago. The beginning of actually I got sick on the full moon last month in February. It was a Sunday night, and I started having death dreams. I finally got sick enough that I had to go to the hospital. I literally could not breathe anymore. And it wasn't lost on me that snow moon that we had, which was, I think, February 8th, I started having all these death dreams, big time. And
Can
like,
you give us some of that imagery? You know how I love the dreams,
And
especially
There you
that
are.
kind.
As an aside here, right before I started getting sick, I was seeing 9/11, 911 everywhere.
Wow.
So I mean, it's not quite death, but yeah, it's the same thing.
Wow, that's a harbinger. Yeah, the dreams themselves were pretty dark. They were actually frightening. Like I saw myself literally leaving my body several times again. Um, but I also had the sense that there was around this something that was feeding off of my energetic body, and that was kind of a form of, it's a snake or a worm. Wait a minute, it's the worm moon. Yeah, I saw these
Yes.
parasitic entities that were draining me. And I had actually been sick since November. Like we went to Kentucky over Thanksgiving. I was not feeling well when we went down. I sort of rebounded, and then I got really sick on the way back. And I never recovered from this. We got through the holiday season and I managed to rally a little bit. But I would say I'd been ill for a couple of months. And the message I kept getting consistently about all of this was that I had to decide. And this is something I've gone through for about a year. Like there's been a couple of sequences of this. I had to decide I wanted to live. And I don't think that message is just for me. I think most human beings have to decide right now. They want to summon their life force to go through something that's spectacular, that's going to be incredible, but that we have to go through a fair amount of discomfort with, because we're basically dismantling a world system.
Yeah, I agree. On just stepping back a minute,
Yeah.
can you describe the worm? Did they have teeth?
I don't have that level of detail. Like, I saw them more or less feeding on my etheric body,
Mm-hmm.
which was the place my etheric body was really what was going out into the grids. And I thought about this a lot, and I thought, did I deplete myself? Did I contaminate myself? Did I pick up some kind of etheric entity in doing some of this stuff, and even in dealing with some of the etheric implants, which we
Mm-hmm.
all have?
Yes. Yeah.
The chakras being the main ones.
They are. That etheric body is the mechanism by which we interface on the scale of the earth energy grids themselves. And so these worms to me were semi-luminescent. They appeared on my body at different critical places. I actually saw them coming out of my eyes at one point, my ears, and around my throat and chest, which was the scary part, because that's the part of my body that I was having trouble with. I literally was, my respiratory system was slowly shutting down.
I find this of interest because some of the work I've been doing with a couple people lately, with beacon type, toroidal type stuff, the worms have been coming out, like pushing towards what we're doing, and it was very unusual imagery for me to encounter. But they're they're wormy, and but they did have teeth. Oh, I will say that. But I'm a visual person.
Were they luminescent, or did they glow in some way? Or
Some of them did. This is awake. I guess I hate to use the word light work, but not in the way. This was awake conscious work, so it wasn't in a dream state, so to speak. But some of them were dull gray, Randy, and it just depended on where I was focusing, where I had my eye focused. So the higher up I was, or the more omniscient I was, the less luminescent they were.
Oh, that's
so the
interesting.
lower in, the more luminescent they were.
So they were probably feeding off of your luminescence.
That I was trying to, create this beacon and push away stuff with some other people. So yes, and I mean, to me, it was as soon as this grid got kind of, when we activated it, they came in, and it was interesting. It was like, it was kind of like fishing in a weird way, where I didn't expect to encounter them.
That's interesting. I mean, if you think about it, it's funny because when they said worm moon, and I got to thinking about it, and I thought, because really the ground opens up, the worms are the first thing that come up because they aerate the soil, the earth. I associate it with trout fishing because as a kid, this is the time of year when we went trout fishing. I mean, we used flies to do trout fishing, but you use worms as bait. And this is a time of year when, quite frankly, here in Pennsylvania, the streams around here right now should be jumping with fish. So you have that imagery as well.
Yeah, they should be here as well, and they're not, by the way. I'm out in the forest every week, and
On a healthy planet, it would
be. There's like nothing there.
There is no normal anymore.
No, and that's part of what we're writing out collectively, is this, I always call it the shakedown. It's we're resetting on so many levels. So on the surface, with all this, what we're seeing is looking to be a financial reset globally. However you want to look at it, that there does seem to be a big major reset happening. But energetically, as we've been talking about through this whole show, this is definitely a reset.
Yeah,
This
it
is
is.
definitely an activated reset.
Another aspect of this too is that the whole global carbon footprint has been reduced by this pandemic, rather. You know, the lack of shit going on in China because of the shutdowns and whatnot have reduced their global footprint, their carbon footprint rather. Pollution's going down. In one way, you could look at this as the planet taking care of the pollution, or you know, bringing those levels down a little bit in response to all the climate change, you know, fear porn that's been put on us for the last 2 years. Just a thought.
That's an interesting take. I mean, look, we interpret. I'm open to what people interpret in the symbology around them. You know, whether I agree with you literally or factually or not, there's this notion, especially in the alternative research community, that if I don't believe it's truth, you must be lying. And the truth of the matter is that a great deal of our reality is an interpretive experience. We give meaning to things that happen around us.
Yeah.
We do it on a literal level and we do it on a symbolic level. And
we can't help it.
No, and much of what is around us is in fact a simulation.
Yes.
You know, when we're talking about the secret space program. So one of my theories is the secret space program, SSP, is a simulation run under mind control. Lindsay Hooper and I talked about this late last year. We pissed a bunch of people off because they thought we were saying we were calling bullshit on their experiences. We're not. What happens to you in a simulation neurologically is no different than the actual physical event itself. You have experienced something. And if that's not true, then everything that we say about dreams, everything that we talk about in terms of entheogenic experiences, anything that we talk about in terms of our own imagination goes out the window too. We are neurologically wired to experience things on a number of levels. So between truth and lies somewhere is an interpretive abstract layer where we can define reality outside of provable facts and cause and effect. And we can say that they exist as part of the holographic experience that the brain is going through.
One of the things that, as you say that, and I've had to tune a lot of people out recently, and in the last year really, is this dynamic. And there's so much conviction's a wonderful thing. It can be, and you know, everything has its shadow, and at least here in this particular plane, in this field. And I've become very weary of those that are aggressive with their attacks towards others, and especially in these conversations that we all find ourselves in this, you know, rather small community, really. And I know everyone has seen it around, and so it's a perception, not to be on, you know, perception as a cue of what you're experiencing is your experience, and
Wait,
that's
QAnon?
valid. Well, it just whatever coming at the personal attacks I'm seeing by people that think they hold the holy truth, you know, screaming holy, holy, holy. And
yeah. Look at the nonsense that's going on between like Corey Good and CW Chanter and Cliff High right now.
Name names.
I'm just saying as an example that, you know, all the fighting over who's right and wrong.
It's very I've become increasingly confused by that aspect of how we are trying to navigate the fabric, the cloth here. And when we start saying, this is my truth is the truth, therefore your truth is not the truth, or your truth has flaws, and let me tell you how your truth has flaws. And then this idea of what I can see physically is the solid truth is weird. It's making me weary, because it's cutting out the possibility that there is anything else, that it's narrowing in, it's blinders. And uh I'm feeling like there's a big disservice going on to this whole, let's work together and piece this, let's work together and piece this and see what we have, rather than I'm negating you completely because you just said this or subscribe to that. It all sounds vague, and I
Well,
don't want
so
to.
that proposition actually has been laid on the table of a number of times. And we use Corey Good as an example because he's the infamous example. It isn't about Corey or his narrative. It's about the fact that on the level of interaction, this became a money-making operation. It became proprietary, and it became an ego game. And then it became a game of stalking and all manner of very vile and vicious personal attacks from all sides.
Absolutely.
And so I've had to deal with a situation in my own little pocket universe here, in some people that I have done shows with, have worked projects with, and stepping back and looking not at what they are saying, not even at what they're doing, but the content of the character of the people and how they comport themselves on an interpersonal level. And when I start to see the pattern where people are doing vicious personal attacks, even against somebody who's a critic or a perceived enemy, and this was the Corey Good school and David Wilcock as well, that everybody outside the camp that was throwing criticisms, valid or not, and there were valid criticisms to be leveled, became enemies, rather than looking at that and going, okay, I understand that you have these reservations, let's sit down and talk about it. Rather than becoming this self-sustaining monolithic truth unto yourself, how about you sit down and talk to other people who have similar visions? And this was kind of, well, I interviewed a person who identified themselves to me as being associated with SSP. She went by the name Ileana in the show, and her name is Elena Kopalnik. And I did almost 3-hour interview with her.
I remember that.
And Elena Kopalnik tried to reason with Corey Good. She wanted to sit down. She wanted to share experiences. There were overlaps. We would say now that they probably shared the same simulation. Corey basically started to call out everybody who he considered to be fake, which was everybody who wasn't part of that particular Gaia TV program.
The Dark Alliance.
The Dark Alliance, yeah. So, basically it was proprietary, it was being done for profit, it was ego driven, and it had this side to it of very nasty, very negative interactions with people who were perceived to be a threat to the narrative that was being woven. And in my experience in interviewing people, especially UFO experiencers and people who came out of dark projects, the person with the least amount of granular detail is the most credible witness, because in almost all cases, in my experience, if you have a complete narrative of this, their program didn't work very well. Because that's basically what wiping was about. The idea of compartmentalizing personalities under traumatic splitting was designed to compartmentalize both the personality and the knowledge about the projects themselves. So based on what we know about the way traumatic mind control works, it does break down over time, and there is leakage. There is this period of time when you begin to repossess memories of something that feels distantly, vaguely like your experience. But total recall isn't really part of the picture. And granular detail, the more detail there is, there's a number of UFO experiencers out there who, once they put out a very sketchy narrative, then begin to fill in the chalk lines, and you're going, okay, so now you're fluffing the narrative, and you're doing this because you're being interviewed, and that simple scenario story, and I could take it from my own experiences, just what I remember about things that happened to me in my early years, that I have enough of a memory to say something happened, this is what I believed happened, there's a certain level of detail, and then you just go, I don't know anything else after that.
Yes, yes. But see, this is all addressing this energetic level of the viral invasion that we're experiencing. So, and that's getting projected out as the virus du jour that is spreading and being very nasty. However you want to look at it, collectively, it's become a reality of nastiness. And but the energetic level of it, we can see and bring back to these personal examples of which we just outlined, and how it's affecting people. So we have people that were once friends fighting. It's affecting everything energetically. It got in like a Trojan horse to our collective psychic body, and now it's projected outward.
Yeah, the coronavirus is basically an attack on your own light. I mean,
Absolutely. Well, this
it is a
little light of
virus.
mine.
And truthfully, if you believe it, it's true. And enough people now believe it that they're manifesting symptoms. We don't know what happened in China. There is no way to document this. There's no official, credible, statistical reporting. What the videos that we got, those chopped up videos of everything from what looks like bodies being thrown into miniature incinerators to where police are dragging bodies off the sidewalk to people collapsing on street corners. We have no idea what the origin of those are. There's no chain of evidence for any of that video that's credible. The reports that we're getting, is it credible or not? I don't know.
But beyond that, beyond all of that, that is the show around this. It's a big show, and it's a spreading show. So it's like candida in the system. It's getting a lot of sugar, and it's spreading in that way. And what I'm postulating here is,
good metaphor.
There's no negating the fact that we're all experiencing it grow, and however you want to think about it, it is growing. And but I am saying that it is absolutely an energetic mind virus. This whole window pane aspect to it, this whole it's so I'm bringing it into this inner or interspace to examine it. That's the peach tree that's the microphone. Mike, I can't look at, I'm stumbling on my words because this download I'm getting. That's the microscope in which I'm having to observe it personally as I look around, and I see collectively what's going on, what are we collectively creating. And it doesn't matter, some of these details do not matter to me personally, but what matters is the fact that there's enough people feeding it, there's enough happening that it's becoming real.
Yeah, there's more and more hosts.
Yes.
In that sense, it is what I called it early on in the cycle. It is a mind virus, and there's a mind virus that basically has attached itself to your light being, to your light body. DNA puts off light. I just saw somebody here in chat, this is interesting, that they just found candida in Australia. I have been
I
Antarctica.
thought it was Antarctica.
Yeah, it is Antarctica. Sorry, I'm looking at the screen from a distance. I
Oh,
know
I'm not in
Antarctica.
the chat.
Thank
but
you,
I've
Suzanne, for
seen
that. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for that. So I'm researching right now some things related to DNA, including DNA that they obviously find in ice. They also find bacteria and virus there. What's it? One of the flus, one of the early flus that was very deadly, was actually sealed in ice up in the North Pole. And now I'm finding out that they're doing extensive research in Antarctica to find these viruses as well. So there's something going on under the ice where these viruses, microbes, genetic sequences have been preserved inside of ice, which is interesting because ice is a lattice crystalline substance as well.
Yes, intriguing.
Isn't it interesting? Okay, so that was a great find. Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah, there's so much there that and you know we're in such agreement on that whole crystalline thing and how all that plays into everything and the programming of crystalline lattice, crystalline matter, all of it, our bodies. I mean, your show has really fleshed that out, thankfully.
And I mean, Emily's early work on sugar's programmable matter. I'll just put this on record because she was the first person I know of that said it. And
yeah,
right now we're looking at this coronavirus, and if it is a virus, if it is what they say it is, one of the vectors is sugar. You know, the first thing you want to survive something right now, forget the freaking toilet paper. Cut the sugar out of your diet.
Yes,
Increase
absolutely.
the intake of critical minerals and vitamins to your body.
And oxygen.
And oxygen.
Mm-hmm.
That's a big one. Boy, that's what I went through. When I went into the hospital, I had hypoxia, which hypoxia has become interesting as well because now we're finding out that the connections between oxygen and mitochondria are being affected by 5G.
Yes. Oh, yes.
So we pulled in another vector there because 5G plays into coronavirus as well. If we're following some of the alternative theories on this, which has to do with Wuhan and the fact that they basically switched 5G on. I mean, what if the world's telegraphing us right now of dangers, things we've been warning about? I'm not a technophobe, but I'm still trying to puzzle out exactly why the specific frequencies of the 5G circuitry now, given the net value of it relative to what it's taking to roll it out. There's some agenda on the back burner that we're not aware of because 5G doesn't make sense. I mean, it's going to be great to have
the push of it doesn't make sense.
No, the push of it doesn't make sense.
It's a net. It's literally a net that's going to 7G. That's where
if you looked at your early phones, Verizon used to brand their phones Verizon LTE, which meant long-term evolution. Verizon had mapped out the evolution of their mobile networks over a long period of time to go from 3 to 4 to 5G. I don't know what was before that because mobile systems were very different in the 80s and even the 90s than they are now. I mean, we've gone through not just evolutions, but complete changes in infrastructure in terms of how mobile has been operated. It's completely different now. It's fully digital. It's very high bandwidth running on microwaves, where at one time it did not use microwaves. So suddenly long-term evolution became short-term investment. Something else is going on. They tell us it's for the Internet of Things. Well, what are the things? What if you're the thing that's supposed to be on the Internet of Things? What if you're an object? A smart actor.
Yes.
Hold that up there, Jerry. Hold that up. Show it close. We're not. There you go.
It's I'm showing an M5 stick I bought, which is IoT development kit.
They're already talking 6 and 7G. 5G was just getting to the proper getting the tighter weave in the net, so many feet apart, and that whole Internet of Things, and working with, I love the imagery because it is a net and connected in with and this, I don't care if we're talking Morgellons, I don't care if we're talking crystallized matter within ourselves, including stuff that we take in like salts and sugars and those kinds of things. And then at some point, where do you differentiate between G and D? There's a whole many, there are a lot of layers here that my mind is weaving together. And of course, none of us, that's the beauty of these kinds of conversations, is we're helping each other process this
Yeah.
information.
So if you look at this on the level of what's been going on since the beginning of the 20th century, which was when we entered into the technological era, we know that Tesla had what was effectively 0-point energy, completely wireless through the air conductivity of energy that we're now calling the Tartarian technology. Again, perhaps that reset that is alleged to have occurred, that was a vestige of the technology of that time, the onion domes and the various cathodes or cathedrals, as they were. And yet, somehow or another, we wound up in a world being run by over-the-wire, high amperage, high impedance, high frequency, alternating current running over a grid of wire work that encompasses probably tens, if not hundreds of millions of miles of wire. And in that YouTube video that I put out, which is part 3 of Eye of the Needle, I talked about the fact that what if these are cattle fences? In one sense, what if they put these wires around us to begin a form of captivity?
Yes.
A very physical form of captivity that tied us economically to the means of consumption and production being widely available electricity for first industrial purposes, then to light homes, and eventually to run your hi-fi system, your television set, your refrigerator, your air conditioner, all the conveniences. But none of this was ever necessary. They put the wires up around us, just like you put up electrical wires around a cattle ranch. So now we come into the wireless era, and there's another level of captivity coming in. What is it? Is it in the energetic field? Is this now about not just the captivity of human creativity and industry, but the harnessing on the energetic body level of literally pulling us into what would eventually be what I call the simulacrum? Something that I did a show with Shamil Asher a number of years ago where we got there and we just went into this. It's like, maybe they're replicating us to create this simulated world, which will be us, but will not be us anymore, but a simulation of us. I mean, what if the simulator becomes the simulated, or the reverse of that? Think about it, Ed.
There's a guy out there who talks about that kind of simulation already exists. It's Anthony something or other.
Oh yeah, Anthony Patch.
Yes, thank you.
Yes, Anthony Patch. Yeah, and that's kind of where we got to with this. In fact, Anthony Patch probably came up in that narrative. We don't really know. What we know is real, is inside us, and we can control the outer expression of that by conscious awareness of who we are and how we embody the present reality. Everything else is speculation. And for some people, I know they're going, oh shit, there he goes. But seriously, we're now at the place where cognitive scientists are going, there isn't even space-time. There's a University of Irvine professor. Yeah, give me a second here. I'll find
Yeah, I
his
saw
name.
that too last week.
Who's basically said that, as far as he can tell, we are basically what Nish talked about earlier, the dreamer dreaming the dream inside of the dream,
Yes, yes, that's what all this is to
which totally it totally freaks you out. But at the same time, if you go back and you read the Vedic texts, you read any of the mystical texts, and even the Bible kind of alludes to this. We're kind of in a place where maybe all we're doing is waking up to the reality we've always lived, but understanding it on another level perceptually. So the guy is named Donald Hoffman. He's a professor at the University of California, Irvine. His book is called The Case Against Reality, and he has YouTube videos out there. Go listen to him. He makes a compelling argument. And what he's really talking about is something that I've talked about. Everything that I've done, everything that I've done on radio somewhere connects to what I call the primacy of consciousness. The fact that our single focus of reality is what we are seeing, what we are presenting, what we ourselves embody, and that the world that is built around us is largely a result of this panoramic screen where we interact with other souls who also themselves are projecting realities. And we have agreed to a consensual reality, which has a lot of rules. This then becomes the matrix. This becomes the programming for the grid. And only humans can do this.
And that's where the idea of gravity lives.
Wow. Holy shit. You should just clip that, loop it, and put it out as its own video right there. She just said it. There you go. That's your zip file right there, Nish.
Rennie, when I was trying to analyze when I get lucid in dreams, it always starts with, in successful lucidity, it always starts with a pinpoint. So I'm doing something, I'm unconscious, basically I'm having dreams, right? And then all of a sudden I kind of go into tunnel vision, and my focus is on, and usually it's like looking down and I'm like, whoa, I'm dreaming, and it's always fun and exciting. And then as I try to expand the idea that I'm dreaming, the dreamer awakens within the dream, which is the goal for me. That's where I start to encounter other dreamers. And that's where I start to encounter those that are already, those dreamers that are already awakened in their dream, that are constructing a reality around me, around my own dream. And so it's paramount to become lucid and see who these other architects are, because I'm an architect, you're an architect, we're all architects in this experience. But if you're struggling to get there, and you're not getting that pinpoint reality that you can expand and then see who else is playing.
Architect. I like that.
It makes sense to me. It makes good sense.
Well, this is actually the metaphor behind Freemasonry that most people don't get. Look, I grew up in a family of Freemasons.
Same here. Can you tell?
I was never despite the rumors and innuendo out there, I was never a Freemason. I actually didn't need it. Even my father told me later on in years that I knew at least as much as most people in the higher orders of Freemasonry, from what
you get it by osmosis if you're in the family.
Yeah. And so the drawing board, the checkerboard floor, the compass, the ruler, these are all aspects of the construct of a reality. And the keys to Freemasonry are largely this, but they're mystically shielded. So what you just outlined there is actually more of the occult side of Freemasonry than most floor level Freemasons ever get, because they don't perceive it. For them, it's a fraternal organization, it's a social organization, it's a way to get ahead. At the high levels of things, it is a control grid, but almost nobody understands that these simple, and I just saw somebody say in chat about how everything's complexified. But things become simple when you begin to guide yourself by these symbols and metaphors. And those are the key issues, those are the key imagery of Freemasonry and what it's telling you, even with that single eye, that's the eye of the needle, that's the vision.
Yes.
We always get back to that, don't we?
We always do.
It always comes back to it. It's just
Well, it is the topic of tonight's discussion. So.
It's actually everything that we've talked about and more, because we're cramming all this stuff through a really tiny little nanotube. See, that's the real secret to all this shit. All this macro stuff that we got to put this through a nanotube.
Yes. You know, it reminds me of people that have told some really interesting out of body stories about how hard it is to get back in their shell. They feel they're so much bigger than they think how do I get back in there? And they see themselves, they know they're going back in, but they are so much bigger than that.
Yeah. You ever wake up from a dream one morning and all day, I've had them already where half the day I'm going, I just can't get myself back in my body. There's part of me that's out there that's, I'm like pulling it in. I'm going, come on, we need this part today to function, really.
Yes.
I can't walk around like disassociating all day, but it's like.
I'm notorious for that, Randy. It's always that. I'm like, I'm getting into my body. Give me time. I'm like, yeah. I'm coming back.
But see, our consciousness, and again, the eye of the needle is a focused consciousness. But the truth of the matter is we're multidimensional beings who exist on many dimensions at once. This consciousness was never designed to contain the entirety of who and what we are. So everything that's trapped inside of the system, that's been farmed, that's been contained, that's been nuked, that's been germed, all of it, that's just one segment of it. We're actually drawing knowledge and energy and power off of other aspects of ourselves that exist outside of the temporal reality that we occupy. You know, this is what you would call the soul, the spirit, the higher self, the oversoul, is that aspect of us that exists outside of this present reality, but it is out there and it is part of us and it's connected. And this is where the dreams and the visions and the downloads and what it's going to take to get through the next 5-year period is coming from. It's going, come on, you can do this, because once we do this, we open up a whole entirely new region of reality. And it's going to be fucking amazing.
I agree. And that's one of this is where, of course, I'm a no fear person. So even though things can be acute and intense and where we have to face our the dark stuff, that we have to face the agitation that beautiful stuff comes from, and a lot of times that is the idea of how transient we are here and how transient everything is, which is part of the nature of my new video that I'm trying to talk about in that is that idea. And I constantly like to use the word immortal and immortality, because this is truly how I feel, and because it's how I feel, I use it. I understand that the vessel is the vessel. It's the car. Keep it clean. It's a temple. Try your best to. That's another thing with this meme that's going around us of this sickness, this mind virus. This virus is, well, how's your temple? If your temple's clean on these energetic levels, if you're processing correctly, if the cowl around you is functioning and there's good blood flow and things are moving in and out as they should, this is a moment of reckoning in a good way. This is a moment of waking, another moment of awakening. Yeah. And these things can affect you. You can see them, but they can't, like I was saying with the worm earlier. I saw it pushing in. It had nasty teeth, and then I saw another one, and then I saw another one, and it was I didn't feel threatened by them because I felt like the shield, which I like to call a cow. I'm really into using that cow imagery right now. Or
Interesting.
membrane, because you get the birth life stuff out of that.
Yeah.
Did you say cow or cowl?
Cowl.
Like arrow.
Yeah, like what you're born, the membrane that you're born in. So
The
yeah, I
amniotic
don't know.
sac.
What is it? You are both watching the chat. Are people asking questions or anything?
That's what I was just wondering too, if we had any interaction, if anybody wanted to ask anything.
The one
That's
thing
a good comment.
the one thing I wanted to throw in there was you were talking about how, we get through this in the next 5 years and it's going to be amazing. That goes along with what like Cliff High's been saying about sci-fi world is coming.
Yeah. I know there's a lot of controversy right now because I've basically kind of bitch slapped Cliff a little bit because I feel like he's fear porning.
I concur.
At the same time, as he's also actually given some decent homeopathic advice to people.
Yes,
absolutely.
Around, supplements and chaga mushrooms and things like. But there's a part of me that feels like either subconsciously or otherwise he's running this fear program, which is reinforcing the proliferation of the virus in the first place, because my postulate is that it's a mind virus first. Is it manifesting into reality? Well, do we actually have infections? The answer is probably yes, because it's been conceived in the mind, and that which is conceived in the mind is manifested into the real world. So, yeah, I mean, I think on one level, and this is where you can't burn the bridges too hard. We held out an olive branch to almost everybody, including Corey Good, because we're all human souls. And because we're all caught up in the drama of this reality, it's entirely possible that on any given day, hey, I could be an asshole. I mean, and I could probably be an asshole on the scale of Corey Good, just not for as long, because I don't have the will and the energy to sustain that energy or that frequency anymore. But in this, we'll call it the alternative communities, I would like to see more generosity of spirit in terms of at least saying, okay, this person's really driven like an extreme turn here and like twisted around a tree and shit. So let's hold space for that.
Yes, I agree.
And allow for the fact that, along this really is actually kind of Christian in, being in forgiveness, being in charity to people, and allowing for the fact that we can all fuck up pretty hard and that there's a road back. And I mean, I've been savagely attacked by a certain contingent on the internet who have made horrible accusations. And yet I've kind of gone to the place where, I may correct you factually. I may occasionally upbraid you because you've said things that are just ridiculous, but I'm not going to battle this anymore because it just feeds it. It's just a feedback loop. And I even think, what's going on with like the contingencies of the secret space program, they're kind of burning each other out to the place where what will happen is it's like when a forest burns and then the green shoots come up again. I'd prefer not to have that scorched earth policy. I would like to see a little bit of greening and not need the gigantic bonfire to ignite new growth. It would be nice if we could work with each other cooperatively again.
I am so put off by personal attacks. Now I have my limits. So when animals become involved, there's scorched earth there. And that's a problem for me. But when it's this person talking about that person and they're getting ugly and down and dirty, I just see that as, well, I see it as what Jung called it, is shadow projecting, and it's just not where I want to be. And so, but as far as people like Corey Good, I I never felt he was authentic. My psychic self, and I hate to say that, I'm becoming more comfortable with it, but I always just saw that as a very
That's a
thin.
commercial enterprise, is what that is. That's what it's been
Yeah,
from day one. And we
absolutely.
demonstrated that. I
It's
mean, there
like
was a lot of
TTSA.
witnesses. The forums are still up there of Project Avalon. We published hundreds, over 100 pages of transcripts of Corey on various forums, post Avalon, before signing with Gaia TV to do cosmic disclosure. So I mean, you can make that you can get to that place yourself, and frankly, it's like Shane the Ruiner has said on my show and other places. Some people are just shitty people, and they are what they are. You deal with them at that level. I mean, respect due where respect earned. Mi casa tu casa. I saw a question here. Somebody is asking about peak oil, which I'm surprised anybody's brought up. I thought that had died long ago. So, peak oil peaked. The whole concept of it. The Russians had long held the abiotic theory that the Earth is generating an abundance of things, including gas and oil, organically, including fresh water. There's no shortage of any of this. There's no shortage of anything. Peak oil was created as part of a dual pincer movement to create pressure in markets, so that when they had sufficient volumes to drop prices, they could use this to reinforce futures markets. And it really goes back to OPEC and the idea that we no longer had oil on the North American continent, when in fact, most of the oil consumed in the United States doesn't come from the Middle East at all. It comes from Canada. Thank you very much. So there is no peak
Yeah.
oil crisis. And if you read Ida Dorpa and you read the Radu Sinamar book, The Second Tunnel Under the Earth, you'll find out that there's a lot of things under the earth that we still don't know about yet that could make our lives real interesting, and we wouldn't even need that black shit in it.
Yeah, there are other ways.
Did you hear the interview with Peter Moon on Carlwood Show on THC?
I did not.
You should listen to that. He goes into more detail about how actually Radu transitioned to Inner Earth and how it's in transition points under the earth and like caves and whatnot, and how you had to actually change your frequency to transition into that space, and
That's
that
true.
many people couldn't do it.
Exactly.
I
That
thought
tells you something right there about space.
Yeah.
If the same is true as above, below, then who got to go to space if they couldn't energetically conform themselves to the frequencies, or is that space?
Or lack of
This
frequencies.
this is why there are portals all over the world in various places. I've been to a couple, and there are entry points into what you would call Inner Earth, which in fact is entry points into another world, another dimension. And some of those are water portals. This is like, what is it? Stargate Atlantis. Your frequency will dictate your ability to pass through into these realms, because that's what they are. There are people who have walked in the forest who literally disappear. They're not found again. They may reappear later. I've told the story about memories of navigating underground using magnetic grids to navigate. No maps, no GPS, no visible signs. This actually was done by the indigenous people as well. They're very familiar with what we would call underground labyrinth systems to navigate for hundreds of miles, but you could navigate hundreds of miles underground in a matter of maybe 1/10 that distance, because of certain energetic aspects that go on underneath the earth. And the fact that not only does distance change, time and gravity as well change. So Yeah, well, I mean, what he's talking about in these books, and when I was reading this book, it's like entire pages are almost highlighted. I'm just going and highlighting stuff because I'm going, yes, yes, finally somebody wrote this, somebody gets this. This is like stuff I've been seeing, stuff I've been thinking, stuff I've been talking about on shows. And it's like Radu Cinema writes this stuff up from what we can just say is a first person perspective as an experiencer. And it's being put out as fiction because as far as the world's concerned, it is fiction.
I need to get into some Radu.
Yes, and I put links in chat to those interviews and his books on Amazon. I also put them in the show notes. So,
Will you put them in our personal chat, Jerry, in Discord?
why, of
At
course,
least
Nish.
one. Thank you, darling.
Discord, there's a world I have not entered much at all. I actually have a Discord server and I still don't understand it. That's kind of like a portal system I can't navigate or something.
It's just a giant chat
interesting.
server.
Yeah. What you know what? It's all right as far as, I mean, it's like a social media platform
Yeah, it kind
essentially
of
to
is.
me. I don't know. You know, it's got, like everything. It's got its ups and downs.
Yes, but the Cruising with Steak Discord is definitely the best.
I love those shows. That's
They're
a guilty
hilarious.
pleasure of mine to go listen to a Cruising with Steak show.
I post them all on my personal channel, so
Yeah.
You put them on Nox
Great
Mente too,
stuff.
Jer.
no, I don't.
You put them, I mean, Vox's Nocte.
No, I don't.
You used to on appearances.
That's just a playlist of links. They're not there.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah.
I see what you're saying.
Well, I do appear on that show, so I mean, it is technically
Right.
an appearance.
Yeah, I get appear. You're like a member. What are you talking about? Cruising with Steak and Jer.
Anyway.
So it's at like that time period if no one has questions.
Yeah.
Someone wanted another question, but I'm not going to read. I'll ask you offline about that. And that's about it. So, Randy, do you have anything you want to plug? Coming up shows or new work that we should look forward to? Or
Yeah, we're actually just ramping up into this year. And so there's shows coming. I don't have anything to announce. The Eye of the Noodle series is on our Patreon page. Some excerpts of some shows will be released publicly, but the bulk of it right now is for the people who are our patrons on Patreon, and that's patreon.com/offplanetmedia. And the idea behind that is largely right now, that audience is kind of a test bed for this material, and it's a feedback for what we are doing in that group. But you know, we're just progressing. I mean, the YouTube channel's out there, looking to get a new website going later in the year that maybe we can abandon Patreon and go to some sane system of both being supported and at the same time not being forced to deal with third-party payment systems and unnecessary usury on the part of the people that are sponsoring the site. But that's the world we live in. It's a world that still requires money.
I thought Jordan Peterson was starting something up like that.
Yeah, I mean, look, I gave away for 10 years. I mean, Off Planet Radio began in 2009 as Exotica and transitioned in 2010 into Off Planet Radio. I just shoveled the stuff out for like a decade and didn't worry about it. We're in a different time now, and I appreciate that people want to support us, and I also appreciate that some people don't have money, and it sucks. It's, you know, this is the great juggernaut of our time, is to figure out how we function economically in equity with each other. And I think that's really a big challenge.
Yeah, it is. It's I mean, I just stutter over all of it. We'll figure it out. I'm liking the idea of the new voice.com that is off. It's in beta right now and it's on the EOS platform, and I'm loving it. It's feeling like a good is feeling a solid, like the best of everything he's done, like Steam It, and I don't know.
I
It's
can't
looking.
keep up anymore.
This one's looking good. I'm not a big lover of D Live like everyone's liking. It's like
Yeah.
a video game and BitChute and all that. I mean, I try everything out, but
But until those guys
voice.com
are available on like Roku or
Yeah.
smart TVs, they're not going to get any kind of traction.
Well,
Yeah.
voice.com's in beta right now, but it is really promising, seriously. And it's set up with that open source mentality that Steam It was. So
I've sort of lamented the fact that we moved away from, and this is true of the tech industry generally. A lot of people don't realize that the tech industry at one time was very countercultural and very much dreamers and idealists who thought they thought of technology as liberation. And I just saw this, I think it was Todd Rundgren was talking, he was in Silicon Valley at the time, saying about when the investment bankers came in, it became a much less interesting world. So like the money
It's
moves
true.
in and the idealism goes away. I would like to find a way to have idealism be able to have a sustainable economy that doesn't rely on parasitism and the type
yes.
of predatory behavior that we have now.
Yeah.
Everybody has a right and a need to live in this world.
Yes.
And like I said, inequity in terms of, that's a whole other subject.
Yeah.
You know,
The curse of the middleman.
yeah, I mean, it really goes into a utopian aspect of, I think that all people are basically decent and hardworking and creative. And I think the trauma in this world has stifled it. And I think that the least creative and the least contributing members of society are actually those who sit at the highest echelons of it, that they're the parasites.
That's exactly it. These are the ones sucking the lifeblood out of everything. The holy blood. They're wrapping all together.
Unholy blood.
Sangreal.
Well, this has been a cool conversation.
Yeah, thank you so much, Randy. It's been awesome having you. And thank
you guys
you.
are awesome. I love what you do. Thank you so much for having me on. I appreciate it.
It's our pleasure.
It's always so great to speak with you, Randy. It is just, you know, your brethren, your kin,
Prescient.
your family.
Yeah, we're fam.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Out there, you guys are awesome too. Chat room was fun to read.
Yep.
Yeah, hello, chat. I'm not in there, but hello.
And thanks everyone for listening. And we'll see you. Oh, by the way, this month we're going to start doing 2 obelisks a month on the full moon and the new moon.
Yep.
So we'll have one in 2 weeks.
Yep.
And we have Craig Williams, who was our guest on Nox Mente a few weeks ago, is going to come back and talk about Vedic astrology and Tantra and all that cool stuff. So that should be interesting. So next week we have a Nox Mente. Be sure to tune in. We'll be back on this channel because we're still banned from live streaming on our monetized channel.
Children.
Yes, I was bad. It's my fault. I agree.
Rebel.
Yeah. Anyway, thanks so much, everyone. We'll talk to you next week. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.